So let's go to Luke chapter 23. We've already looked at the first 7 verses where it's described as being a trial of Jesus, first of all, by the religious authorities in the Sanhedrin. We're in the early hours of Friday morning, but they were unable to find anything that could be used as a charge that would be acceptable to the Romans and to Pontius Pilate as the governor to execute Jesus. When they brought Jesus to Pilate, Pilate asked him, that's verse 3, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered and said, "It is as you say," that is, yes. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." Under the Roman judicial system, there is no charge. But they kept insisting, verse 5, he stirs up the people for 2 reasons. First of all, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as this place. But still no charge. Verse 6, when Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean, as they mentioned Galilee in the major part of Jesus's ministry. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, that is the Herod that had executed, killed, beheaded Jesus's relative, John the Baptist, when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. So now we come to the 3rd trial, when Jesus stands before the king of the Jews as according to Tiberius, the emperor. So we come to that trial before Herod, which came to nothing, as we shall see. Verse 8, now Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus. This was the man that Jesus described as a fox. For he had wanted to see Jesus for a long time because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some miracle or sign performed by him. So he questioned him at some length, verse 9, but he answered him nothing. That is, he said not a word. Some have suggested that Jesus' reaction to Herod was as one who had killed the greatest of all the prophets, John the Baptist. Verse 10, the chief priest and the scribes were standing there accusing him vehemently, but still no charge. So Herod, as was typical, with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, dressed him in a gorgeous robe. That would be probably from his own wardrobe, because only the nobility were allowed to wear purple. So he dressed him in a purple robe, which was a mocking, of course, of Jesus, because only the kings and the aristocracy were allowed to wear imperial purple. And Herod sent him back to Pilate. Very interesting little note here from Luke, verse 12. Herod and Pilate became friends. Two awful men became friends with one another that day. It sounds as if there had not been good relations between them. But now they became friends because Pilate had sent Jesus into Herod's jurisdiction. For before they had been enemies with each other. They hated each other. Through Jesus, they now became friends. Verse 13. So what was the next thing? Pilate, verse 13, summoned the chief priests and the rulers and the people, that is, the people that had been, for some reason or another, brought onto the side of the authorities. So a considerable number of people. Verse 14, and he said to them, you brought this man to me as one who incites the people. That's your charge. Is he inciting them to rebellion? Is he a traitor or a false Messiah? And behold, having examined him before you, I find no guilt in this man. There's no charge to be answered regarding the charges which you made against him. And he continues, verse 15, nor has Herod, for he sent him back to us. And behold, nothing deserving death has been done to him. There can't be an execution. He's not committed any crime under the Roman system of justice. So typically, verse 16, I'll punish him. They didn't punish the criminals alone, but anyone who caused a ruckus was punished. So he was punished. I will punish him and then release him. Verse 17. Now, he was obliged to release to them at the feast. That's this Passover feast in month Nisan. He always released a prisoner, thinking that this would be the way of releasing Jesus. Verse 18, but they cried out all together, this crowd that had come onto the side of the religious authorities. And they said, away with the man and release for us Barabbas, son of Abbas. Now, who was he? Well, Luke tells us, verse 19, he was one who had been thrown into prison for insurrection. So he was a zealot, made in the city, and he had also committed murder, so he was under execution. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept on calling out, no doubt to the word of the religious leaders, crucify, crucify him. So the crowd kept calling out. Verse 22, he said to them the third time, why? Why shouldn't he be released? What evil has this man done? What crime has he committed? Under the Roman law, I found in him no guilt demanding death. I can't enforce the death penalty. So again, they were calling out, verse 23, their voices began to prevail. It alarmed Pilate that so many people were asking for the release of Barabbas and for the execution of Jesus, whom Pilate had declared innocent. But now, you see, he was under pressure because he was the governor of the Jews, and he couldn't have an uprising under him. He would get back to Rome and he'd be in trouble. And Pilate pronounced this sentence that then their demand should be granted. In the other Gospels, we're told that he washed his hands of the whole thing. In other words, what they did was not because of him. He wasn't in favor of it. We are also told, I think it's in Matthew, that Pilate's wife had let him know that she'd had awful dreams about dealing with Jesus and not to have anything to do with him. So Pilate pronounced sentence that their will should be granted under pressures from the crowd. So he released the man that they were asking for. He let Barabbas go in the place of Jesus. He'd been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, but he delivered Jesus to their will. Well, in the end, of course, the history of Rome tells us that Pilate was estranged from further Caesars, emperors, fallen out of their favor. He retired to his farm and ended his life by committing suicide. Now we come to the crucifixion itself and the way to the crucifixion. When they led him away, they took hold of a man called Simon of Cyrene, an African. Possibly a black man. We don't know exactly, but it could be so. That's why they made him the cross bearer. He'd been coming in from the country. He was a Jewish believer in Judaism, and placed on him the cross to carry behind Jesus. So Jesus was at the front with the cross head, and he picked it up behind. Verse 27, following him, there was a very large crowd of the people, and many women were amongst them who were mourning and lamenting him. Jesus, of course, had prophesied this earlier on. But Jesus, turning to these women, said this, daughters of Jerusalem, stop weeping for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. He'd already prophesied the ending of Jerusalem, which took place in AD 70. Verse 29, behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. There are two things, I think, in that prophecy. It's prophecy in Hosea. Hosea chapter 10 and Isaiah 2:19. First of all, Jesus is referring to the time when the Romans would come and ransack Jerusalem and all the other towns for treason. And it could be that, or it could be with reference to the last days and the day of judgment. Verse 30, they'll begin to say to the mountains, which of course is quoted in John's Revelation, fall on us, and to the hills cover us. That is most definitely a reference to the day of judgment. Verse 31, Jesus declares, when they do these things, when the tree is green, in other words, when everything seems to be okay, what will happen when it goes dry? So there's going to be a terrible catastrophe, either, as I said, in AD 70 or on the last day. Verse 32, with reference to Jesus' death, he was not alone in the execution. Two others also who were criminals, felons. Their crimes must have been murderous, or they would not be executed. They were being led away to be put to death with Jesus. So that's where we get Jesus with the two criminals, one on each side of him, on their crosses, which was the Roman means of execution. Verse 34, Jesus was saying, there are numerous sayings in the other Gospels, but Luke picks this out. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. So there is indicated the purpose of the cross, which is to be the means by which sins are to be forgiven. And they cast lots, like dice. They cast lots, which divided up his garments among themselves. So his outer garments were taken off, and the soldiers cast lots to see to whom they belonged. The people stood by, looking on. There's going to be a great change, as we shall see. Even the rulers were sneering at him, saying, so this is the people that are behind it, the religious leaders of the day. He saved others, let himself save himself. So again, it's part of the mockery to come down from the cross. So this is the Christ of God. If you notice, they don't believe it, but he's claiming to be the Messiah of God, his chosen one. The soldiers were also mocking him, verse 36, coming up to him and offer to him vinegar, or as it is in the Authorized Version, sour wine in my translation. This was an offer to appease the pain, to act as a kind of anesthetic, but Jesus refused it until the very end. And this is what they said, these soldiers: if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. Again, the continued mockery, even when he was dying on the cross. Then we have from Luke a reference, again from a Roman, from a Gentile, which Luke was. Pilate had an inscription written that was nailed onto the cross. Luke abbreviates it. This is the King of the Jews. In the other Gospels, it says Jesus of Nazareth. King of the Jews. When the religious leaders came to Pilate, they said, "You can't put that up. You should say, this man said that he is the King of the Jews." And very irately, Pilate replied to them, "What I've written, I've written." Te graptai. He's very angry with them. And then we get this reference to one of the criminals who was hanged there. One of them was hurling abuse at Jesus. "Are you not the Christ? So save yourself and us." Again, a mockery. But the other one, this is very interesting. The other one, rebuking him, said, "Do you not even fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation?" We indeed are suffering justly under justice, quite rightly. We receive what we deserve, he says, for our deeds. But this man did nothing wrong. Very interesting insight into this man. And he was saying, this would indicate his belief in Jesus. Jesus calling him by his name, Yeshua or Joshua, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And there was the notice over Jesus's head, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says to him, recognizing the spiritual nature of this man, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So there's a reference to the fact, as against the Sadducees, who didn't believe in life after death, but he's saying to the man, you're going to be with him in paradise. It's a Persian word which has crept into the Aramaic. In Greek, paradiso, which was used for the Garden of Eden, the perfect place that God had created, and also with reference to heaven itself. Now, it was about the 6th hour, that is 6 hours after cockcrow, which was the first Roman signal for the beginning of the day at 6 o'clock in the morning. So now it's the 6th hour. So we're talking about noon on Friday. And Luke adds, darkness fell over the whole land until the 9th hour, that is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So the commentators say a great deal about this reference to darkness. It could be literally, of course. There are all kinds of disturbances of nature in the Bible. And it also meant spiritually that the powers of darkness had prevailed. Of course, what they didn't realize was that the dark powers of evil that had engineered the means by which Jesus was killed, the devil thought that he'd won, but actually it was Christ's victory. The sun was obscured, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. That is, from the top to the bottom. This was the veil that secluded the most holy place in the tabernacle, where the blood was brought on the Day of Atonement and sprinkled on the mercy seat. But Luke is keen to show that the Jewish religion had now come to an end. Luke is pointing out that when Jesus died upon the cross, he was making obsolete, and that's a word that's used in Hebrews, he was making an end to Judaism. The veil of the temple was broken. Anyone could see in, which they weren't allowed to normally. And then the last words of Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, cried out, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Psalm 31, verse 5. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. I commit my spirit. He gave up the ghost, I think is in the Authorized Version. But we don't use the word ghost today. So they've translated it, I commit my spirit. So he commits himself into the hands of his Father. All that he'd done on the cross was sufficient for the forgiveness of sins. And so he breathed his last. Now that's unusual because in 3 hours, Jesus had died. And sometimes it takes up to 3 days for criminals to die on a Roman cross. But Jesus died very quickly. Verse 48, now there was a great difference in the behavior of the crowds that had been shouting out for him to be crucified. Verse 48, all the crowds that came together for this spectacle, when they observed what had happened, began to return, beating their breasts, a sign of remorse. Let's hope it was a sign of repentance. So they went home in a very forlorn state. Interesting, in verse 47, the centurion who was in charge of the proceedings, when he saw what happened, he began praising God. It's a very interesting comment from Luke. Praising God, not the gods in the plural, as was the Roman way, but this centurion was coming to belief. Certainly, he says, this man was innocent. So, verse 49, all the acquaintances and the women who'd been at the cross, I want to say something about that. There were 3 Marys at the cross, including his mother and John, because in John's Gospel we're told how Mary, the mother, was committed by Jesus into the care of John. And he did. So this man was innocent, without fault. Verse 47, the actual word that the man uses is significant. It's the word righteous, which of course takes us right back to Abraham, doesn't it? He believed God and it was committed to Abraham for righteousness. So even the centurion had curious beliefs. Let's hope that they were saving beliefs at the death of Jesus. So we'll finish off the chapter, which is about the burial of Jesus. A man named Joseph, this is Joseph of Arimathea. Arimathea was a village northwest of Jerusalem, to the north of Jerusalem. A man named Joseph was a member of the council. So he was on the Sanhedrin. He was a good and righteous man. He was a true believer. Some have coupled him up with the rich young ruler who came to Jesus earlier. He had not consented to their plan of action. He didn't vote for it. A man from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who was waiting for the kingdom of God. He was a true believer. This man went to Pilate and he asked for the body of Jesus. And he was allowed to do that because of his status. He was a rich man. He took it down, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb cut into the rock where no one had ever lain. Today, there is a garden outside Jerusalem, or part of Jerusalem, where most Protestants believe that the body of Jesus was put into the rock and sealed up. And you can go there today. Where Jesus died was called by the Romans Calvary. It's the translation of the Aramaic name for the place, which was Golgotha, place of the skull. General Gordon in the 1800s found a place where eyes were cut into the rock. It's a little hill outside Jerusalem, and he himself believed that on the top of that, where Jesus was crucified, Constantine, the Roman emperor, at a later date, his mother Helena indicated a place where they built a great church, which was believed to be the place where Jesus died. But Gordon believed that it was on this hill that Jesus died. Is it there still? Yes, it is. It's a bus stop. There is, as I said, there is a church to commemorate the death of Jesus upon the cross. But Gordon believes that it was on the top of this hill, shaped as a skull, that Jesus died. Verse 54. It was the preparation day. So we're now into the evening of Friday. Saturday would be the Sabbath where no work was to be done. So that's why Joseph of Arimathea comes to take hold of the body of Jesus and put Jesus in his tomb. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. Now the women who had come with him out of Galilee, they followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. And of course they were to return the next day after the Sabbath on the Sunday, that they were to return to anoint the body and leave it at rest. Then they returned and prepared spices and perfumes. And on the Sabbath day, because it was the Sabbath, the day of rest, they rested according to the commandment of God not to do any work on the Sabbath. So that's where we are at the moment. We're on holy ground. We've gone through the story as through the pen of a Gentile, dear Dr. Luke, and we're always very reverent when we come to Luke chapter 23, the crucifixion of Jesus. But chapter 24 is the second part of the gospel story. And may the Lord be willing for us to come to that joyful event next week.